Hi, this is another in a series of videos for OpenPleth. This one covers the breath display form. So we'll start out by opening up the file we've been working with, toot. Select AMI, click toot, and you still have our negative delta flows. We're going to discuss a little bit about navigation first. One of the things that I found that I didn't like about the form is that there were so many different columns that I always had trouble figuring out where I was at. So I added a new feature that allows us to pare down the columns we don't want displayed. And it saves it, so the next time you bring it up, it will keep that same number of columns. This is a little more manageable. Another navigational feature I added was the ability to jump to certain sections. Let's say we wanted to jump to the first breath that had 8 milligrams of histamine, or in our case, we're wanting to work with saline, so we'll start out with the saline. Now, one of the things that I added to the spectral properties, and I'll bring this one up for this particular breath, is now I have two separate graphs, one of the RIP and one of the pneumatic. Now the idea is if you're breathing at one breath every 10 seconds, then your dominant frequency should be 1/10 of a hertz. Of course, there's going to be other frequencies, but you would expect them to be pretty high. As you can see, they're pretty high here and here. Any movement will have a tendency of causing frequencies outside here. In actigraphy, 2 to 3 hertz is what we use for detecting movement for sleep. And I'm not an expert on horses, so I don't know what would be their typical frequency of movements. But anyway, so let's compare that to, let's try the saline one, which we know is way off the mark here. So let's take a look at this one. And you can see there is a significant amount of energy outside 1 hertz, which is kind of what I was trying to pin. As you can see, the pneumatic generally has its energy within 50% within 1 hertz, but as you can see, this is much lower, around 40%. I also added what's called a correlation, which is a correlation between these two graphs, and here you can see it's pretty low in comparison to others. Let's try this one, for example, where the correlation is 94, 95. So, how are we going to use these to help sort out our breath? Well, Tom had a great idea in color coding some of these breaths so you could know which ones are meeting the criteria that we put together and which ones aren't. So I incorporated that into this feature called Show Filter Recommendations. And what this form does is allows us to select, unfortunately, up to 2,000 different settings of how you want your breath sorted. And there's two major methods here. There's the spectral density, which is just what we saw before, of what percent of your breath is within a certain bandwidth. The other one is how well does the bandwidth, does the spectrums correlate with the pneumatic? And I can see arguments on both sides. I mean, obviously, if the horse is moving, then the correlation would probably be a good indicator of a good or bad breath. However, if the horse was coughing, that's probably not a breath that you want to take, and you'd probably still have a good match with the pneumatic, but you would probably have out of frequency components in just the straight spectral density. So anyway, let's try. In spectral density, I have two different methodologies. I could have the top percentage, or I can have a certain above a particular threshold. Let's cancel this to start out with. Let's take a look at one of these breaths so we can kind of see what we're talking about. Now, here is the spectral energy properties for the RIP. And let's see, so this one's not a really good one. But see, if we set a threshold of saying anything above 30% will accept. This particular, at 1 hertz, this particular breath would not be accepted under those criteria. So let's go ahead and try to do that. So let's set our above threshold. What did I say? 30%. Okay. Now, here's what we see. And this is a very poor example because I don't have enough breaths that are in no man's land. But you can see is that the red indicates breaths that are, there's my yellow. We're using for analysis, but given the threshold that we put in, the software thinks we shouldn't be. The yellow indicates ones that are not being used and probably shouldn't be used, and the green ones are the ones that are used that that we're using that the software says is okay. Well, let's have something a little more realistic. This one here, top percent, what I do in this is I sort all of the breaths by whatever particular thing. Frequency band, the low 0.125, 0.125, 0.5, below 1 hertz. And then I can pull out either the top 30% or maybe, say, the top 50%. That seems to work pretty good. So now, we'll click on that. We have a little bit of a different color scheme. We still have these two here that are still questionable. This one's questionable. This one's questionable. This one doesn't like them, we're not using, but it does like this one. Now let's say we want to go ahead and implement this. So we go ahead and click on the implementation button here, and notice we have the same form. Make sure that this is what we want. Remember what we had before. We'll say OK. Now, as you can see, we have some deleted. All of the ones that do not meet the criteria have been deleted. And if you go over to the graph, we have a significant change in our graph. And we can go over our summary, and we have a pretty, a better response. Now you say, well, you know what? I don't really like that. Let me try another method. So reset all of that. Now, we still have our recommendations, and let's say we want to clear the recommendation, so we'll just toggle that. Now, let's look at correlations between RIPs and pneumatics. Now, here we have like the top percent. We have keep the top, 75% or top 20%. But, if we only keep like the top 4%, that's probably not a very good idea to do. Because if you implement that, we're not going to have enough breaths detected. So you have to be careful of that, because if you stick too strict of a criteria, you won't have enough breaths in order to do your dose charts. So let's get rid of that idea, and let's see. Let's try the top 40%, just for grins. All right, so we got that deleted, and look, that's not a bad graph. Go back and look at our file summary. And it's not bad. We got rid of the... Now, again, this is just a tool. It may not be the best tool for everything. You may want to go back and clean some of these up, saying, well, I really want to keep this breath. I think it's, I think the software is wrong, thinking that should be thrown out. So there's another feature. The last one is above a certain threshold. Now, if you noticed, most of our thresholds for the correlation, the decent ones were running like 92%. So let's set our threshold to be 0.92. There we go. We'll try that. Now, not great, but you can see we deleted quite a few. But, it's just another parameter to play with. Now, the other feature I did not talk about was this, how do we apply it to? Now, right now, saline is the only one it's being applied to. But let's say that we wanted to apply it to all the dosages. And say above, let's say the top 60% of all of them. So we're going to throw out anything that is the lower 40% of spectral density below 1 hertz. Try that. Now, not a great, but as you can see up here, we are working on we've deleted all of them, all the bands we've had, all the dosages we've taken at all of them rather than just a saline. So, and of course, if you don't like it, you can always undo it. So I think we've covered everything we need to in this particular section. The next one will be on exporting breath data to other file formats. So for now, so long.